How could Jesus do this? It tells us right there exactly what he was thinking. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. Jesus knew he had nothing to lose. Jesus knew that he was not losing anything by humbling himself. Jesus knew that he was not demeaning himself in any way, shape, or form by serving. Jesus knew that he had all power and authority. It had been granted to him by the Father, and he was not risking anything. He was not undermining his credibility. He was not undermining his position. He was not demeaning himself in the eyes of himself or anybody else, as far as he was concerned. He was willing to serve. He had nothing to lose. And because he had nothing to lose, he had nothing to fear. He had no fear of what he might lose, because he had no fear of losing the authority, because it had been granted by the Father. He had no fear. And so he was losing nothing by serving. He was losing nothing by doing what would be considered the job of the lowest of the servants in the household. What he had been given could not be taken from him by anyone or by his actions. He had nothing to lose. In fact, the opposite is quite the truth. The reverse is true. That by demonstrating this, by doing this, he was demonstrating just who God is. The God who loves, the God who helps, the God who serves. The God who could demand, this is the way things ought to be, therefore you will do it this way. But doesn't. Instead, he humbles himself and serves. Nothing to lose. Can be taken from him. You see, his identity wasn't bound up in his authority. His identity wasn't bound up in his position. His identity wasn't bound up in other people looking up to him. His identity wasn't bound up in that. He knew where he had come from, and he knew where he was going. His identity was rock solid. His identity was bound up in the Father. His identity wasn't bound up in his authority. His authority was bound up in his identity, absolutely. But he wasn't risking his identity by serving others. He wasn't risking his sense of authority by serving others. He was rock solid. He knew exactly who he was and what his calling was. And so he would not waver from it, he would not compromise in it, and he would not be demeaned by anyone regardless of what they said or how they saw him or what they thought of him or what they said about him or how they tried to undermine him or how they take him and nail him to a cross. He is every bit as much the Son of the living God hanging from that cross as he was standing on that mountain declaring all power and authority. He knew who he was. He knew all authority had been granted to him, and so he had no reason to fear. It couldn't be taken from him. And his identity wasn't bound up in his position or his popularity or his praise or the esteem of others, or in the fact that he was a leader, or had power or authority, His identity was grounded in who he was in the Father. And so he had no need to fear, and he knew he was risking nothing. In fact, quite the contrary, he was revealing just who God is because he was serving those whom he had made, serving those whom he had been sent to save. He was washing those who were unclean so that they could be made clean and restored to their rightful identity. And he says, this is my example to you. The servant is not above the master. Your master has done this for you. You should do likewise.